it's interesting because if I were to go to a doctor's office for a procedure, and let's say it was for a heart procedure, and I asked the doctor what his qualifications would be, and he said, well, I've read a couple of books and I've Googled it, and I think I'm pretty ready to perform the operation. Probably most of you would not go to that doctor. If we were to build this church somewhere else, and we found an architect, or we found a builder, a constructor, and we said, can you build this building? And he says, yes. Have you ever built a building like this before? No, but I've read some things and I've Googled it. We wouldn't do that. But as far as our saints go, we're ready to accept any kind of nonsense that we receive on Google that's going to tell us about what our faith is. So, if we were to go to a doctor, we would want to know what his qualifications are. If we went to a builder, we'd want to know what his qualifications are. We need to apply the same degree of diakrisis, of discernment, to who we place our education of our faith in. And our education is not based on super preachers and those who write books and tell us how great we are. We need to know, and the Orthodox Church offers to us the great saints of the church. And if we ask most people to name 3 saints of the church, I think that they would be hard-pressed. They would be unable to say what any of those saints that they mentioned, what works they produced, or what did they do for the faith. Today, we celebrate we celebrate 3 saints. First is St. Gregory of Palamas. The second, St. Gregory, Pope of Rome, the Theologos. And third, St. Simeon, the new theologian. Well, that's wonderful, you're thinking, but who cares? It's a guy who was born a long time ago. What's he got to do with my life now? So, St. Gregory of Palamas is one of the saints that helped explain or helped give us some understanding of who God is. One of his, and that's in what's called the triads. We're not going to talk about that. But he also wrote several sermons on the saving power of Jesus Christ. He is the one who wrote about what Christ does for us. And in this very wonderful sermon that he gives, he does 2 very important things. One, he connects us with the Old Testament. Because when we think of the cross many times, and the reason I'm talking about it now is because next week is Sunday of the Cross. Today, St. Gregory of Palamas, we're going to preface this by talking about what he says about the importance of the cross. And so one of the first things he does is he connects it to the Old Testament. Because Christ was present then in the beginning as creator. He was present now with us today, and he will be present. This is why that's one of the prayers that the priests say, is that he was, is, and shall always be. And that's one of the prayers that we say. And so what he connects us with is 3 or 4 very important Old Testament figures. Number 1, he connects our lives and our Christianity with Abraham. Why? Because God called Abraham out of his pagan land and said, I want you to leave your country and I want you to come into this new land that I have made for you. And St. Gregory of Palamas says that is the symbolism, that is the foreshadowing of what Jesus Christ asks us to do. Leave the life that you live right now, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's love of money, whether it's love of material things, whatever it is, leave that life and now come to the land that I am promised to you, which is the eternal kingdom. The second one he talks about then is Jacob. And Jacob now blesses his two sons with his blessing in the form of a cross. He crosses on their heads and offers them the blessing. This is again a foreshadowing of how the cross will be used. And he did it to both sons, one of which who stole the birthright and the other one who was then blessed. So both of them became blessed. And today this tells us that regardless of who we are, the righteous or the sinners, that Jesus Christ has come to save both of us. He talks about Joseph coming out of Egypt. The same thing. Joseph is sold into slavery, but then he is redeemed and becomes the king of Egypt, and he brings his family in. This is the foreshadowing of Jesus Christ. Because what do we have with Jesus? Jesus, as the God-man, comes and is born, not is sold into slavery, but is certainly treated and in the same manner that Joseph was treated, and even unto his death, unto the cross, and he now is and has been King and Savior. So there's that foreshadowing in the story of Joseph. And lastly, he links it to Moses. And what was Moses called to do? Was called to bring his people out of Egypt, God's people out of Egypt, and bring them to the land that they were promised. And this is what Jesus calls us to do. He says, the two great commandments that I have distilled from the Torah is what? Love the Lord your God with all your strength and heart. Number 2, love your fellow man as I have loved you. So just as Moses was called to save his people, not just to save himself, but he was called to save his people, and that's what we're called to do, is not just to be self-serving our lives, but to offer up our lives for those who need that. Does that mean I'm going to die and that's how I get into the kingdom of heaven? No, it means those people that have to take care of elderly parents, those who have to take care of disabled children, those who have to take care of teens who are stuck in alcoholism or in drugs. And they have to die, those parents or those uncles or whoever they are, or sometimes it could be kids too, to their parents. They have to die unto themselves and sacrifice themselves for the good of their fellow man or woman. And so that is the typification of Moses. So what St. Gregory of Palamas does for us that these feel-good preachers can't do is connect your lives to what happened in the Old Testament. And that this story is not new. The things that God has called his prophets and his saints to do is the same thing that he's asking us to do. And if we forget that connection, then we forget our past, and we become like that doctor who Googles it and thinks he knows something, or that builder who thinks he knows something and knows nothing. This is why St. Paul says that preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ is a stumbling block to the Jews, but more importantly, foolishness to the Greeks. And the Greeks should be translated as the Gentiles. What Jesus Christ is asking us to do is foolishness in this world. It makes no sense. But when you look at it from the standpoint of what the prophets did in the Old Testament and what Jesus himself, existing before, then, and now, asked them to do, the 4 that I mentioned, is something very important and something very difficult to do, and no less difficult than for us to do. These are the saints that teach us about our faith, and we need to be more in tune with what they say and not just listen to the feel-good nonsense that we hear on the radio and that we read in these dime store novels that we buy at CVS or wherever we buy them.